Okay, without any further ado, I am going to introduce you to the speaker today. So today we have Western Australian-based journalist Kristy O'Brien, who has been involved in production of factual television for more than 15 years, travelling across remote parts of Australia, India, Africa, China, and Southeast Asia, with a content focus on trade, international relations, and agriculture. Her focus currently is as a reporter and host for flagship ABC program Landline, Backroads and Movin to the country. Previously, she worked in the fast-paced world of news as a reporter, chief of staff and producer at the Seven Network and ABC. At the ABC, she produced stories for Australian Story, 7:30 and Old People's Homes for Teenagers. Recently, she also provided journalistic insight and narration on the hit Netflix series Last Stop Larrimah. Kristy has worked on several independent documentaries and was awarded the Access AIDC internship as Australia's emerging young producer in 2014. As part of this award, she went to London to work with Jamie Oliver's Fresh One Productions as a producer/field director. Upon moving back to Australia, she was named in the Screen Producer Australia Ones to Watch program and financed to complete an internship based in WildBear Entertainment in Sydney. She directed and produced several international documentary projects for the company, and in 2015, her first documentary as executive producer and writer, Tough Ride, was broadcast on ABC television. She is a mother of two rather wild, tiny territory boys who make the juggle all the more fun and is passionate about bringing regional stories to life. Welcome, Kristy. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much. What a lovely introduction. I guess the two things I get asked the most off my CV are who did Paddy in and also can you cook? Now people finding out I work with Jamie Oliver. I mean, you know, I'll leave you guessing on both answers, but I am delighted to be here today. Not so keen to follow in the fabulous shoes of Fiona Simpson and Vicky O'Halloran, who are such tremendous women in their own industries and rights. So bear with me. Hopefully I can offer some insights. I think one of the things that people want to know the most from journos is how do we find stories? It's not the most straightforward answer in that they come from all different conversations and avenues, and it's not really a straight path as such, but there are some elements that I think if anyone is trying to pitch stories or trying to engage media that are well worth thinking about. I do come with the lens of television, so just because that's the nature of my background, and pictures matter the most to us, but you'll find with newspaper that's also important, and increasingly with digital with the focus on social media and also stills. So providing good pictures is always, you know, such a fabulous hook for us, to the point sometimes there might be a story that is perhaps more worthy, I guess you could say, but the pictures are better on the other one, so we'll make the call to go with the other one. One of the stories I did this year is one of the highest rating YouTube clips we've got for Landline, and that was a profile on the Hewitt brothers. I mean, there was a few elements to that made it appealing, but the pictures were what got it over the line. We had this fabulous kind of Man from Snowy River opening shots in the, you know, the West Max in the background, and it went like viral, you know, just because people were just stunned by this imagery. I mean, there were a few biggest organic property in the world, and any of those biggest, you know, first, those are also great hooks for us. But it's just a reminder that even though there wasn't a great deal of newsworthiness to that, it was a simple profile on this company, a little bit about foreign investment. There were some hooks that appeal to news, but largely there wasn't kind of a breaking angle or anything. So that is one thing I would say is just always keep in mind what the pictures are, because the thing that kills a story the quickest is, well, how are we going to illustrate it or who are we going to talk to? That's the other really important element to me, is that humans always work. You know, there's such a myriad of complex and fabulous personalities in the North, and I think we're actually really spoilt for choice for brilliant case studies for things that we might be wanting to get into the public. So I guess that's the other thing I'd say, is just think about those case studies. Think about, you know, the fisherman that you want to put forward because he's struggling with certain biosecurity laws, or the flip side, you know, the producer that's, you know, deathly afraid of this biosecurity outbreak and what it actually means, nuts and bolts on the ground, business loss for them, human face to it. That will always work. The other thing I'd say is, you know, be smart with media, and I'm not kind of trying to spook you from talking to us, but we're very lucky in the North actually that you kind of learn quickly who are the journos you can trust and perhaps not trust as much, because it is a give and take exchange, especially in news. You are doing the story, so you get something out of it, but there's kind of this to and fro. And I'd just say, yeah, be vigilant sometimes, especially if you don't know the reporter, or if they're from, dare I say it, down south. Well, I talk to you from Western Australia, but just be confident that they are coming to it from the right place, I guess would be my say. That's not always an option. Sometimes you just have to respond to media. But if you are the one leading the media, try and develop that relationship, because it's not something to be afraid of. Some of the best partnerships that I've had over the years, the best stories we've produced, have come out of those relationships with, Cattlemen's Association, fishing. I've done wonderful stories with fishing lobby groups in the territory, and that's that sort of relationship and back and forwards. And would this be a story? Is this a story? There's no bad idea. Like, we are so desperate for content sometimes that no idea is a bad idea. And I mean that in the sense, just give it a crack. Like, you don't really know necessarily what might feed into another story we're doing or something else we've been working on that could then bolster that. So, always give it a go. I know a lot of you are from the biosecurity lens, so I was thinking a little bit about this, and stop me at any point if you have questions. But I know that there's some incredible plans around a biosecurity outbreak and what would happen in the north of Australia, and I'm sure there is a component of that involves the media, but I don't know if this is possible, and I'm certainly speaking out of turn from my organisation, but we do emergency broadcasting, and so if there's a cyclone coming, there's a whole plan around how we deal with that. Also, I think the weight of that emergency broadcasting and that responsibility should probably apply to biosecurity, because there's going to need to be a lot of logistics, a lot of, movement restrictions, a lot of things that potentially, like we do with cyclones with the bomb, we have a kind of drill scenario, and we have those meetings well ahead of, November, December, so that everyone's on the same page if something would happen. And maybe that is something to consider, because, I think we're all kind of waiting with bated breath, hoping something doesn't happen, but the chances are getting higher. So I think that is something that maybe should be considered. The thing with that is also biosecurity is such a complex topic. And what I would make sure is always ensure the journalists you're dealing with understand properly exactly what is happening, what is going on, just try and kind of simplify it as much as possible, because details lost can quickly get away, or, something said sort of off the cuff can quickly race away as a big thing. So that's why having that plan is probably really important. So that's just something I would think about, because these can snowball really quickly, and then you just spend your whole time catching your breath, rather than being on the front foot, having the plan, having the people, having the contacts that you send the things to, all of that stuff. The other thing is kind of make biosecurity sexy, dare I say it. It's sort of cringe saying it out loud, but, the campaigns, like, this is a bit different, but Soil Your Undies was a great one that they did about soil, which can be deathly boring trying to cover. But there was a component of, burying undies in the ground, and it offers pictures again on soil, like how on earth do you illustrate soil otherwise? So that's something I would think about. I'm conscious I'm just kind of talking at you, so please do interrupt if you need anything, or Anne, if you have any questions you think I should answer. Anne did ask me if I found it hard as a female journalist, which is a bit of a complex one to answer, because I think it's changed a lot. I started in media when I was 15 at Win Television in Toowoomba, and it was a pretty cutthroat world, and it was certainly a world you could get into trouble very quickly if you weren't smart, I guess, is the thing I would say. And there's been a lot of reporting about, media over the years, but, I didn't get in any scenarios that were, compromising, but, there's funny little things, like when I started, it was very much about deepening your voice in broadcast. So we had voice training, and we all wanted to have these deep voices, like Sandra Sully was sort of the pinnacle of what you wanted to sound like, to the point my brothers used to absolutely rip the life out of me and say, Peter Harvey's just come in the room, so that was definitely like a thing. Now it's just not, everyone keeps telling us to sound more natural, and to the point on Backroads, particularly when I'm recording episodes, they're kind of like, you're slipping into newsreader, stop it, out, so it's funny how that's changed, and I think that's a really good thing, and very good for the industry. appearance matters more than it should for females in media, but that's just sort of the way it is. I watch the news with my mother sometimes and feel like that's a good insight into, Middle Australia's commentary on what the female presenters are wearing. It shouldn't matter, but the thing I was taught is don't be distracting. Like, be neat and tidy or whatever, just don't become the story kind of thing. So, but on the flip side of that, what I will say is the greatest validation I've received in the industry has been in recent years, particularly from women. And I'm conscious we've got men in the audience too, so I don't want to isolate anyone, but I think I was terrified of being a mother in media because I had watched in the newsroom particularly that not be a kind world for the hours and, the unpredictable nature of the work and everything. Sort of lucky that I've gone more into current affairs and long form, which is a bit more predictable. But I just remember being absolutely terrified before I had my first son, Hudson, who's 5 now, that my career was done. So as a result, I kind of worked so much harder, right up until the last minute before I had him. I was in Indonesia, 7 months pregnant, or maybe 8 months actually, anyway, and on these crap roads, bouncing around, trying to thrash myself to prove myself that, this pregnancy wasn't holding me back. And, then we went out to the desert in NT-WA border and did this camel story in 49-degree heat. And I was, again, heavily pregnant. And, I just, in hindsight, I didn't need to prove myself as much as I thought I did. It was all in my head. And I think that's a good lesson to take away, that sometimes, you are definitely your own worst critic, and that, if you can do the job, that's all that matters. And, I think I'm very glad though that I've learned that now, and I was a lot less hard on myself for my second child. But the other thing is, I think all experience in life makes you better at your job, and whether that be becoming a mother or not, I think that any life experience, particularly in journalism, adds to your repertoire of understanding someone else's plight, walking in someone else's shoes. That can only come from having different experiences in life. So I've always sort of leaned back on that and said that, it just added to my arsenal of being able to relate with someone when I'm interviewing with them. Sorry, is there a question? Did I hear?
On that note, can I pop a question in?
Yes,
so do you
please.
have a situation or a story where you sort of that left a really big imprint on you, that you felt like you learned a lot from, that you took into, future stories, or is there something that left a real mark for you?
I think one of the defining stories of my career was probably the live export suspension and fallout, only because that was one time where I saw an opportunity to dig down into a topic that I knew well, and I also saw the impacts of not getting it right, if that makes sense. So there was so much follow-up to that also. I mean, I broke the compensation story on that. There was a lot of people that I developed incredibly close relationships with, that both in Australia and Indonesia, doing that. So I think that was one that really, I was at the start of figuring out whether I would go into foreign correspondent work more or into the agriculture lean. And so that kind of thrust that decision upon me a little bit, because it was such a big national story. And then there felt like there was not many people covering it from the northern perspective. So that was a defining moment. The other ones, people always ask, what's your favorite story? And it's just not that clear cut, in the sense it's always the people, not the story, that stay with you. And I have met people in the north that absolutely redefine the notion of perseverance and resilience. And I know that sort of gets thrown around really quickly and easily, but I don't know if any of you know. So there's a woman called Bolton. Her name Frauke Bolton. She's in Kununurra, and she wrote a book actually about her experience. And an early farmer, come from Germany with a husband. The long sort of story short is that she had a lot of tragedy in her life, but kind of kept going on. And people like that just, they're not the big faces or most famous or anything, but they've just stuck in and done their part for their family and their community and kept on going. They're always the ones that stay with me. It's I think I need to sit down one day and actually look at all the stories I've done and see which ones are the best, or which ones really stood out. But I do think, Northern Australia shaped reporting entirely. I came to the Territory when I was 21, and so the interaction with Indigenous Australia and the absolute multiculturalism and all of that has made me a much better journalist too. I don't know if I answered your question. Sorry, though. I think the other thing you wanted me to touch upon was just about female leadership, and obviously I've been chief of staff, but I haven't really done as much in the leadership space as many of you. I've looked at some of the names down the list, but I have worked under incredible, both actually male and female leaders. But it really does help having those female leaders, because again, when I had my son in 2020, I got asked, basically because the whole country was limited in travel, and that's probably the only reason I got a foot in the door. But I was asked to present Backroads in place of Heather, who was stuck in Melbourne and couldn't move around. But I had a 5-month-old, so I was at first, well, actually no, because it's not my nature, and I'll touch on this later. But I sort of said yes straight away, hung up, and then had a panic attack about how I was actually going to pull it off. But so then sent an email to the EP saying, just so you know, I've got a 5-month-old, and I'm not actually sure how this will work. And to her credit, she was one who was like, well, you just need to put that aside. Like, my mum came with me and we did the logistics to make it work. But it was her confidence in me and saying, I did it, I worked with my baby, you can do it. That was what made me say yes to that. And subsequently, I've hosted lots of those shows. So sometimes just having someone who really does get it does make a huge impact. And that's why, whilst I am not in a leadership position myself, I am so grateful for those who are. And it's that confidence and building each other up, men or women, just building each other up. And I had a fabulous crew on that shoot too, who were really, really encouraging as well, which makes a difference. So, tell your friends to go for those jobs, tell them, nominate for the award, push for the higher duties. I think just a little bit of a vote of confidence is so integral to many things. And you did talk about your mentor program, and I can't push mentoring enough. I have had such incredible mentors over the years, unofficially in some instances. I've also done the mentoring, again, mostly unofficially, but it feels good, and it is absolutely integral in your career to have those people in your corner and telling you can do things that you don't think you can. The other question, well, you asked for sort of tips, I guess, on career and all of that, broad topic, mind you. I think the one thing I wish I'd done earlier was holding my ground on my knowledge. When I first started in the ag space, I remember I was at the cattle yards in Katherine, and a few blokes, powerful in the cattle space, I walked in to do the story, and I was sort of, approaching them. I said, went to say, hi, I'm Kristy from FC, turned their back on me, and just, because I was a young, very blonde female reporter, I think they just were like, oh, she wouldn't know what the hell, she's talking about. And I just, I sort of shrunk a little bit in those instances. And now I wish I'd just owned that knowledge and really been like, no, I do know what I'm talking about, and not go jump off a cliff, but certainly, pushed a little bit harder on that stuff. The other thing that I really push, and I feel a little bit like I've betrayed you all moving to Perth, but carve out your niche. Northern Australia has this absolutely, unusual opportunity where you can make your own career path. And that's what I did. There was no Landline reporter in the Northern Territory. So I pushed and kept kind of being the pain in their backside to become the NT reporter. Doco stuff, I was like, no one was really making that stuff within the ABC there. So pushing for that. And it's not always linear. Sometimes you do have to go sideways to go upwards. And I think that's probably sort of, a lot of people say that, but it is true. Sometimes you've got to assess the path and go, well, if I get that experience over there, then eventually I'll be able to do that one. So that's the other thing that I've found, that NT offers you that usually a lot more senior experience than what you get in southern parts. And so you kind of got to just run with that and own it. Passion is the building block of all of my entire career. I probably do it for free, which I try not to say that too much because I probably get completely used by many. But I think you're so lucky if you do what you love. And if the job itself is not that much where the passion lies, then try and find those avenues like mentoring or, other aspects to the job that can bring that fulfillment. But it is a joy in finding what you feel like is your calling, and that's sort of where I sit with my job now. Learn the art of the hustle. You know, it's real. Like, you see something that you want, just push to get there and charge at it. I sort of joke to people on email sometimes, because it'll be like my 20th email to them, I'm the world's greatest stalker, which probably I am, because I think you've got to get ballsy with that stuff. And this is, again, slightly out of school. I've noticed there's a reticence sometimes with perhaps younger journalists to just get on the phone or or knock on the door or whatever. We've got this kind of digital age where everyone's cyber, DMing or whatever. And we've worked with a few researchers on some projects in more recent times outside the ABC. And the number of times I nearly pull my hair out saying, just, did you call them? Because what's the worst that can happen? That they hang up on you? Like, I think approach everything like that. What's the worst in this situation that can happen? There's a saying in journalism, and I hope there's no medical practitioners on here because this won't apply, but we say it's not heart surgery. So like we can't tie ourselves in knots about everything being most important and everything, but just get out there, do the best you can. And also, as I say, don't be afraid of those uncomfortable moments, because I have learned to get very comfortable with the uncomfortable in my career. And that's when I've learned the most too. I got offered it makes so many people laugh that actually know me, the sports reporter position when I first moved to Darwin for 6 months. I can't even tell you which ball belongs to which code still to this day, really. But I took it on because I wanted the work. I was on 3-week contracts and desperately want to stay in Darwin, was in love with the place like so many of us do. So undertook this hellish 6-month period of trying to, navigate the AFLNT every week. And anyway, I was very lucky that I had a few other journos I could lean on for some insight into what the heck was actually happening on that field. But that's just an instance of where you get uncomfortable, take those positions. Things like the Australian Story I did, when they first called up about that, I'd just been working as a field director on the show for a territory-specific episode back to Jack Thompson and the Purple Bus, which some of you might know. They rang up and they said, like, we really like you, you work on this. Do you just want to produce the whole episode? Like, every part of me wanted to say no to that, because it's in my head and a lot of people's heads across the country, it's viewed as a pinnacle show. So to work on that, I was like, I am not up to that level. But I said yes, we pulled it off, and I'm very proud of that episode. So I think just, what's the saying, like, paddle like hell underneath and smooth on top. Sometimes you just have to really fake that confidence that you can pull it off. And you do, that's the thing. We're so much more capable than we ever give ourselves credit for. I think women are really bad at that, not owning their skill set. Of course, there's a fine balance too. I'm not saying be arrogant, but I think be confident and take on all the help from everyone. That's the other thing. Never sort of be too smart for anyone. Not too smart, but be the person who wants to know everything and absorb from those around them. Imposter syndrome, I get asked about a lot. My boss, Kathy Snitchling, actually does a whole talk on imposter syndrome if you want to get her in. She's much better at that. But I think we all have a degree of it. But I've also tried to flip it on its head lately and see it as a positive. It drives me, the fact that I feel like I've still got something to prove. I think that drives a lot of what I do. There's a lot of other reasons that drive it too. I feel a real responsibility to the people that we serve. But I think that's a sort of a big one for me. I also asked me to talk about balance and having such a busy life. All I can say is a 50-50 balance is it's just like, it's not real. There's a swear word I can insert in there, but it is not a thing really. And I've had to change my headspace on that, and I think it's made it better. Elizabeth Morris spoke at a Women in Media event we had a few years ago at the Magistrate, and she explained it much better than I ever will. But it's sort of the idea of shifting your thinking so that there are parts of work that you get joy out of, and that are moments in the day or whatever where you are doing something for yourself, ideally, or you're interacting with someone, you're joking with a colleague, whatever. There's joy in the workplace. So then when you get a phone call after work, it's sort of it kind of counteracts the other, I guess. And a lot of us do things at lunchtime, not lunchtime, during our day that are home things. So I think it's just trying to balance that out in the best way you can. Obviously, it is a tricky one because you can't burn out either. But I guess the reason I come to it is because I do get so much joy in talking to people and meeting people. And so it doesn't really feel like work sometimes, but I know that's not everyone's scenario. I've got it written down here, don't get used, and I'm not sure what I meant by that, but I think it is that balance of sometimes there is opportunities to be used if you love your job a lot. So being conscious of that, I guess, is also something I think I maybe could have been better at over the years. Probably said yes to a lot of things that didn't necessarily benefit me, but I felt I had to do it, or being a nice person. The other thing I'd say just on life balance is just accept help. It is actually one of the hardest things I've found to do is accept help from other people. I'm the champion contender for trying not to burden anyone. I think I love helping people. I love being there for people and that side of it, but actually cringed to the cows come home when it comes to being on the receiving end. But people do want to help. That's the thing. Like, it makes them feel good, and sharing the heavy lifting, especially in regards to women and trying to make the load easy and then juggle with kids and older parents or whatever you might be doing. It all swings in roundabouts, so as long as you're doing your part to help them later on, or it really does. I've had babies, and then my friends have babies, so we drop a meal, they bring a meal, whatever, all of that goes around. And I think if you build up your support network, invest in those friendships, because especially I found in Darwin, I wasn't from there, I didn't have that family support. They become the absolute lifeblood of my existence, when I was particularly at home with babies, or, tougher times. Like, our friends have always been everything. And I feel like it's a really unique part of the world for that. I don't think you get such close friendships because so many people aren't from there. So I think you're all in the same boat of trying to help each other. Yeah, I think that's probably the extent of my broad sermon, dare I say. So I'm very open to questions from anyone. And if there's anything you felt I left off, I'm happy to cover that too.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Kristy. And I'm going to open it to the floor in a minute, but I thought I might just pepper you with a couple of questions, if that's all right.
Yeah.
So the first one, I guess, is just going back to something that you said earlier about, challenging things, basically showing up with your knowledge and being confident with that and not sort of shying away from it. How do you do that in a way that isn't sort of confrontational or almost aggressive? How have you managed that in the sort of work that you do?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. So I think that the thing that I've always found when, like, we encounter people sometimes, and the tricky part with our job is you've got about half an hour max, and this is more in CAF than news, you've got 2 minutes, but you've got, say, half an hour, 20 minutes to get that person completely on side, So it's a little bit of reading the situation, and this sounds basic, but people love to talk about themselves, in the sense of, if you want to bring someone out of their shell or get you on side, I think it's kind of coming to it very respectful of their knowledge, or making it clear that you're very respectful of their position, their knowledge, their background, whatever it might be, to try and plant that seed so that you can then, present yourself in a way that you're comfortable with. I think the other thing is just, don't be afraid to, I think, how do I say this? Does it matter if they don't, like, I think we're so worried as women sometimes about what people think of us. And sometimes I do think we just need to care a little less about that, because if someone has decided that you are arrogant, I mean, it really, that's on them in some ways. I mean, as I've just said, I'm trying to get everyone on side in an interview, but generally speaking, I think you just dazzle with your knowledge more than, telling everyone what you've done, or, where you've been, or whatever, who all of that certainly will get someone offside. But I think just presenting yourself as very confident in your actual knowledge and your expertise, and a lot of you come from different areas, I think that's the way to do it. I don't know if I've nailed that question, sorry, but it is tricky.
Oh, that's really good. And this is probably much the same, but I will ask anyway. You've lived quite a high profile life. You've been, obviously in the media and the spotlight. How have you managed that?
That's a very good question, actually. I mean, I'm notoriously, it's ironic as I say it, even though I work in TV and I'm in the limelight, being the limelight in that respect, personally have absolutely struggled with being known outside of that. It's such a difficult thing because I know there's a genuine interest and I'm a journalist, I get it, but it's again comes back to that give and take. So there's a whole lot of strategy that went into what I did when I was in the public eye in more ways than I am now. And it was give a little bit so that you feed the beast, but keep what you want to yourself. So it was navigating how to feed the media with the baby photo or, the wedding photo or whatever. Or even in interviews I've done, for Last Stop Larrimah and stuff. It's, it's thinking about it enough so that they get whatever they think they want out of it, but holding your line too, I was, never comfortable with doing media about me. I was very happy to promote the shows and all of that, but I sort of figured out early that was where my line was, and I was not willing to bend on that, and that's what I've stuck to. Have zero regrets about that. I think at times it probably annoyed the absolute hell out of various advisors and other journalists that I wouldn't talk in a personal capacity, but I think you've got to be comfortable with your own story being out there. And also, drummed into me from the beginning of time is don't become the story. So I think journalists do best when they're not, distracting, if that makes sense.
That's fabulous. Thank you so much. And I feel even more amazed that you came and joined us today to tell us a bit about your experiences. So thank you so much for that.
No problem.
I am going to open it to the floor. We've got a couple of questions in the chat that I'm going to read to you, but I'm also going to encourage people to put their hands up if you'd like to ask a question of Kristy. Otherwise, feel free to put the question in the chat as well, because I'm going to open it up so you can have a few questions peppered at Kristy as well. So the first one is from Rick. And Rick is asking, having worked in Queensland, Northern Territory and now Western Australia, what have you learned about working in a completely new place or job? And how do you get up to speed to be successful?
Know the right locals, whether it's, Queensland, NT, India, whatever, know the right people. I think many of us who've worked, for instance, in remote communities will know that there's a blocking element that happens. And it may not be the wishes of the traditional owners in the sense, I've been somewhere where I've had this person in a certain position trying to say, oh, they don't want to hear blah, blah, or whatever. It's just knowing the right people. Our contact book is the Bible of our existence, and our name, that's the other thing I will say is what I have learned is that if you screw it up, people will remember that. So if you screw someone over, more so than getting the story wrong, I've got the odd name wrong, I'll admit, then people will remember that and they will tell each other and your reputation will be marred. So do the hard stories, ask the hard questions, sure, but don't ever go back on your word, and know when to pull out, know when it is not the right time to push someone to do a story too. I think I have always tried to keep, human kindness at the core of my existence in the sense that I couldn't work on four corners. I don't have that, the story is everything mantra. Some journalists do, and we perhaps need those in the world. So I think that's fine. But I think what has given me so much hope, but also enabled me to work across the country is that your reputation travels, and that applies to all lines of work, not just media. And in the territory, it's, 10 times more important. I remember when we were trying to get the Timber Creek episode up for Backroads, and I'd pitched that. It was my idea. I was really, really proud of it and really wanted it to happen. And the traditional owners were having a meeting about something else in town, and they said, well, And there was various producers down south involved, and I was sort of stepping back at that point because I was presenting, and we like to have a bit of separation during the research phase. And they said, no, we want her. We want her to come here and talk to us because she lives here, and basically we know she won't screw us over. And I had to tell them why they should trust us to do the story, and present this kind of argument, and sort of promise my word that what we were saying we were coming for was actually what we were there for. So that's the thing I've just learned the most, is that, if you find the right person on the ground, it will open all doors. It will smooth all, kind of flare up that can happen. And also it means you get the best insights, and also cast your net wide. I mean, nothing annoys me more than the same low hanging fruit being interviewed on a topic. I think challenge yourself to, as I say, hit the phones, hit the doors, whatever it is, to get different voices. And I think that's hopefully what's made my journalism stand out, is that I've got access to places and people that others haven't, I think I would say. So really good question. But yeah, I think that the fundamental thing is just, it always comes back to people, doesn't it? This business.
I think in a lot of different industries, probably all of them really, Kristy, is my experience.
Yeah.
Moana's got a couple of questions here. The first one is, I've struggled with my entire identity since changing careers. Did this impact you when you moved to Western Australia with your family?
Yeah, well, it's early days, so I'm only a few months in, but it was my biggest hesitation in moving, actually, if I'm really, really honest about it. So what happened is, we have never had a permanent West Australia correspondent for Landline here. We also never had an NT one, but get into that later. So when the position was first made available, I was NTWA correspondent. So I mainly covered the Kimberley and Kununurra and the north, and I actually had never been to Perth for a story because my colleague Sean Murphy, the New South Wales reporter, was from Perth, so he was happy to kind of flit over and do a few yarns. But it's safe to say, for the 30 years or so of shows, is it that long? Yeah, its existence, WA has been a slightly left out. So the opportunity come up for me to, when Sean retired, to move harder into covering WA. And so I took the opportunity because it is a big one, to have 2 states under my belt, or territory and state under my belt, is a significant opportunity. Also, with doing more backroads, being based with near an airport with a lot more flight options has been a game changer for just not being away from my family as much. But yeah, definitely, like I used to go to, a conference or anything and know everyone. And I still have everyone in my contact book in the NT to get answers or to find a contact somewhere. I don't have that here. I'm absolutely starting from scratch, and no one knows, who I am, or they don't really know what I've done. But that said, I've had that thing where, so-and-so in Kununurra said you're a good journo or whatever. So it does trickle down a little bit, but definitely I'm definitely trying to find the new person I am. The other thing that I had pinned my flag to a lot was being that kind of NT person, the amount of, I don't know, I think I probably got more work because I was in the NT, because it's that sort of quirky, NT element to it. So yeah, I have struggled with that a bit, and I don't really have any tips except to say that I think we go back to our foundations and then build up from there. And so what I'll be doing is definitely, trying to prove myself and, add my imprint to it, I guess. But it is difficult, and making friends is difficult. All of that is very hard. Unfortunately, in the position of having young children, so that sort of opens a lot of doors. But it is difficult, yeah. There's also a refreshing element to people not knowing a single thing about you, though, too, I will say.
That's fantastic. And then the other one from Moana is, how do you define success for yourself?
That's a good question. I've probably been someone who has had to reassess that lately, to be perfectly honest. When I was a kid, it was working on Landline. That was like church in my house. So I remember I was doing work experience there when I was at university, and I just thought, I will never get to work on this show. Like, you're kidding me? They're the best journalists in the country. And so then to finally have sneakily crept my way in the door and, secured a position, I do feel humbled by that all the time, because that show has such a loyalty, and genuine love. Like I think maybe Bluey gets it too, but you get shows very rarely that have this genuine, you are our show and you are our voice kind of thing. So I feel really privileged to work in that space. Presenting Backroads I just didn't think it would ever come my way. I don't know if presenting is my absolute strength, but that's been such a joy to work on because we get to work with kind of the best cameramen and best sound producers and everything. So I learn a lot on that show. I think that's my learning show. Landline's my comfort show. But, I think I was thinking about this a lot actually because, people say, oh, you regret working or, you're away from your family or whatever. Yes, maybe I will. Maybe I'll, on my deathbed, look back on it. But I think I've gotten so much joy out of work. So to me, it's that I have found a space where I'm genuinely proud of what we do. I think we've genuinely changed things because of some of the stories we've done. And I think the tapestry that I've created of life experience, whether that's held up as success in someone else's eyes, and probably it's not. There's a lot of media that would see what I do as kind of secondary and very kind of hokey and not that important, and maybe compared to Four Corners or breaking big stories it isn't, but I still think that success for me is that I generally can walk into someone's house and be welcomed there, especially for bush people, and the fact that I've given voice to some people over the years that would never ever get a mention in the local media, let alone national media. The fact that I've been able to bring their perspective and stories and lived experience to life, I'm very proud of, because the awards don't really make you feel that good. You think they will, like, I was Rural Journalist of the Year when was that? This year, sorry. And you're like, oh, yay, finally, got the top gong. But it's actually not that you think about at night. It's, those interactions with people and the thank you get maybe after a story because, we did this story on remote transplants, for instance. So it was about how incredibly difficult it is when you need an organ transplant. We did a case study of a woman at a station down on the Barclay and then another case study of a woman who's a country singer, and walking in their shoes for 5 minutes and realizing how incredibly hard that was just so humbling as someone to go, well, anything you're going through is never going to be as bad as that. But also we put that story to air and it's never our ambition. We have no agenda with this sort of thing. We, with the ABC, we're very strict editorial policies, but they had 3,000 phone calls after that episode of people wanting to donate, organs. So it's that. And then it was something like 10,000. Anyway, it was a huge number of direct correlation between that story and that woman's absolute heartbreak going on screen and then people signing up to save a life. That stuff's incredible. So I think that's success. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Great answer. We also have Kane. Kane has asked, you mentioned that it is important to ensure journalists understand what biosecurity is and what is going on within that relevant space. Is that something you've experienced firsthand? And I think I might just add to that and say, what would you recommend to people in this audience, noting that, biosecurity might not be necessarily well understood by journalists? What would you suggest that we do? So I guess, there's two kind of points to that. And thanks for the question, Kane.
Yeah, thanks, Kane. I mean, the interactions I've had mainly with biosecurity has been in the cattle space, so lumpy skin, foot and mouth, sort of those looming threats, I guess you'd say, but also the instances where facilities have been shut down and whatnot. It is a hard sell as a story because the average punter doesn't realise how much of an impact a biosecurity outbreak will have on their lives or on our economy. It's a really difficult one to get across. So I guess that is where you do need to try and really illustrate what the impact will be. And I know figures sort of get thrown around and lost a little bit, but I think what we do need to do is, balance that fine line of scaring people because you want them to take it seriously when it's happening and then getting the word out. I do think there should be some sort of biosecurity and media plan, like there's plans for every other industry that's involved in that landscape. I honestly do think that the media should have some involvement in that because it is an emergency situation if something happens, and I think it should be treated like a cyclone or anything else. That rollout and that coverage and that movement and broadcasting plans and all of that. I mean, as the ABC, obviously we have a different lens on it, but I think try and engage your journos individually. And I know that's hard when you're in a department because there's certain rules and whatnot with who you can talk to, but it is worth a one-on-one pitch to journalists, and you can kind of read through stories and see where someone might have a certain interest in trade or agriculture or whatever, and kind of focus in on them, I would say, is probably my best tip. The other thing is, and this is a little bit sneaky, but there is a period in news particularly where we will run pretty much anything, and it's from about the end of November, and I would argue it's Australia Day in the Territory before anyone gets back on deck. But during that period, I tell you what, it is a very prime time to get your coverage up, because there is crickets in the newsroom at that time of year, and we are so desperate for stories. They often go national as well, so a lot of our stories in the Territory get picked up more on the wires and interstate. So that's another sort of insider trick, I would say, is maybe think about something like that. Again, your case studies. So John out here, if his melons get infected with this, he's looking at this whole field, being pulled up, this much money in loss, and also your melons are going to cost $6 more at the counter. Always try find the angle that's relevant to that. We did something recently on eggs, and really made it about the consumer to try and highlight the issues or biosecurity issues there. So that's the only real tip I can give. But yeah, knowing your journos is sometimes the best way into it too.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Kristy. I'm aware we're right on 1:30 my time, so I'm going to wrap it up there and thank everyone for coming, and give you a special thank you so much for your time and for all the thought that you put into that, and for the tips that you've shared with us today. I think it was an amazing talk. I see that Amy has placed a feedback form in the chat for you, so if you have a couple of minutes just to fill that out for us and let us know what you thought of today and what you would like to see us offer in the future, that would be really appreciated. But I'm sure you're all joining me silently and virtually with a little round of applause for Kristy. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you everyone for joining us today.
Thanks.